Good evening, everyone. My name is Craig Amason. I am a Special Projects Coordinator for the Meyer Library here at Missouri State University in Springfield. On behalf of the library's Ozarks Studies Institute, I'd like to welcome you to this virtual author visit to campus featuring the novelist Amy Engel. And on behalf of Tom Peters, our Dean of Libraries, and Melissa Eichen, our resourceful executive assistant who helped set up this Zoom event, we thank you for joining us. Please be aware that tonight's program is being recorded and will be posted on the library's YouTube channel at some point and promoted through its presence on the web. Amy Engel is the New York Times best-selling author of 2 young adult novels titled The Book of Ivy and The Revolution of Ivy. She is also the author of 2 adult books of psychological suspense, the first of which was The Roanoke Girls, published in 2017, and her most recent titled The Familiar Dark, published almost exactly 1 year ago. She has received several awards for her work, one of which I feel especially compelled to mention, which is the Georgia Peach Book Award for teen readers, because it comes from my home state.
Okay.
But enough about me. Ms. Engel's books have been widely reviewed and praised by other award-winning authors we really like, such as Laura McHugh, whom we hope to have with us again later this year. Ms. Engel's latest novel, The Familiar Dark, is set in the Missouri Ozarks, which always grabs our attention. It's a book about the bonds of family, women doing the best they can for their daughters in dire circumstances, as well as a story about even the darkest and most terrifying of places, how they can provide the comfort of home. Commenting on the novel, Catherine Stedman, best-selling author of Something in the Water, says, quote, Engel's ability to conjure the harsh beauty of the Ozarks is spellbinding, an emotional and powerful read, end quote. Ms. Engel has a law degree from Georgetown University and worked as a criminal defense attorney for 10 years before she and her husband started a family, at which time Amy decided to stay home and split her time between being a mother and writing. The Book of Ivy was published in 2014, winning the Missouri Gateway Readers Award and launching her new career as a writer, and she has more books in the pipeline. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Amy Engel. Amy?
Thank you so much for having me. I love these kind of events where you can, we're not in person anymore, but it's still nice to interact with readers in any way I can during this past year especially. I'm pretty informal, so I am going to sort of go through and talk about my background, how I decided to become a writer, a little bit about the process of getting published and my process of writing books. And then I was going to read very briefly from The Familiar Dark and sort of talk a little more about that book in particular, because it's my most recent book and it's set in the Ozarks, as Craig said. And then I'd love to open it up. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer any of those. So to get started, just as a little background, I was born in a commune outside of Lawrence, Kansas, many years ago. My parents were the ultimate hippies, and they were grad students at KU. And from a very young age, we moved a lot. When I was 3, we moved to Iran when the Shah was still in power. And one of my earliest memories is my mother taking me to the British consulate. They had a really small library, and they wouldn't let us check anything out, but they would let us take the books into this little courtyard and read. And it's one of my earliest memories, is sitting on this little bench and my mother reading me books. And when we moved back to the United States, my love of books grew even more. One of the first chapter books she read to me was Charlotte's Web. And I remember she got to the end and Charlotte died. And I cried so hard that I threw up all over my mother, the bed, myself. I was hysterical. And it was sort of my first realization that books can be as real to people as the world they're interacting with every day. And from then on, my love of books just blossomed. I know all writers say this, but I love to read. And we moved around quite a bit. We moved to Taiwan, we moved back to Kansas City. My parents got divorced. My dad moved to California. So I spent every summer in California. So I was always the new kid. I was always switching schools. And so books and stories were sort of my refuge. If I didn't have anyone to sit with at lunch, I could read a book, or I didn't have anyone to play with after school, I could read a book, which this makes me sound really sad and lonely, but I did have friends, but I just always turned to books. And at some point, that love of reading developed into me wanting to try to write. And I was pretty young. I was in grade school when I first started writing stories. I still have quite a few of them, and they're just as awful as you can probably imagine. But I love to write them, and I would give them to my dad, who had a PhD in English, to sort of critique. And this was back in the 70s when parents were a little harsher, a little, maybe not quite as delicate with their children's feelings. And my dad would give me back my stories all marked up with red, and things like, this has way too many exclamation points, or this ending is crap. And my mom would be horrified that he was saying this to a 10-year-old, but I don't recall being hurt by it or upset. It spurred me on, like, oh, maybe the next time I can write a better ending. And in some ways, it gave me a thicker skin, which has helped a lot in the publishing world, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later. So after high school, I went to, well, actually, let me backtrack a little. In high school, we had a creative writing class. It was a year-long class, and we could write anything, poems, short stories, whatever, plays. And that was the first time that I sort of got the feeling like, oh, maybe if I work hard at this, I could actually be good at this. But when I went to college, I went to KU also, I was an English major, which I loved. But as anyone who's an English major knows, you spend most of your time writing about other people's books. And I didn't take a lot of creative writing classes. I don't know why. I don't know if I was scared of it, or I just didn't have room in my schedule. I honestly can't remember. But I took English classes where I read, Shakespeare and things like that, and wrote papers, but I didn't do a lot of creative writing in those years. But when I graduated, I still had that part of me that wanted so badly to be a writer. And I'm dating myself here. This was before the internet, before you could just Google answers to things. And I literally had no idea how somebody did that. I didn't know anyone in New York. I didn't know anyone in publishing. I didn't know anyone who had ever written a book. And so it felt just impossible to me. I just had no concept of how I would even go about it. So my creative side has always been balanced by a super practical side. So instead of becoming a writer, I decided, I'll become a lawyer, which they could not be more opposite. And so I went to law school, primarily because I don't even know if I thought I would like it or not. It just seemed like something to do, and I could, hopefully get a job, which is not a path I necessarily recommend. But after law school, I moved back to Kansas City, and I got a job at a law firm, and I was a criminal defense attorney. And I did about 50% white collar crime and 50% what they call street crime. So like murder, drug charges, things like that. And I was so busy that I didn't really have time to write, but I still had the urge to write, even though I was exhausted. And so I remember being in the law library at our firm late at night, working on a brief, and I would flip the page of the legal pad over and start a story. And I would spend, a couple hours writing a story. And then I would be so mad at myself because I was so far behind on the brief. But I still had that desire. And so, at the time, sometimes I felt like those were sort of lost years in a way, because I wasn't doing something I really enjoyed, and they were years I could have been writing and I wasn't. But looking back on it now, I think that those years gave me a pretty unique perspective on crime and on criminals. I have a hard time after that seeing anything in black and white. Most things are sort of a murky gray to me. Most of the people I defended were not horrible people. They might have done horrible things, but they were still, you could still find the humanity in almost all of them, which is not something I guess I expected it, but I didn't expect it so broadly. I mean, almost without exception, they were people who were funny, who loved their kids, who were sorry, who, were caught in circumstances that that got out of control. And so I think it gave me sort of a perspective for writing that has helped a lot in crafting characters. So I practiced law for 10 years. And then when my children were small, they were 3 and 5, I decided to stay home with them. And I told my husband, I said, I think I'm ready. I'm going to write a book and I want to get published. And so that's going to be my goal. And if a certain amount of time goes by and I'm not published, then I'll go back to practicing law. And he said, well, how much time are we talking? And I said, well, give me a decade. And he was like, a decade? He thought that was just so long. And I remembered reading an article about Sue Grafton, and she said it took her about, I think, 8 or 10 years to get published. So I thought, well, that seems like, I know publishing is slow. Everything takes a long time. I'll probably get a lot of rejections. So 10 years seems good. So he agreed. And for the first 3 years, I didn't write anything. I was, chasing kids around. And I think I was probably nervous about, actually, I'd never written a whole book before. I'd written stories and probably what would be considered novellas, but never a whole book. So eventually I was like, I better get on it or my 10 years are going to be up and I'll have to go back to practicing law. And if you see how many writers used to be lawyers, you'll know how many of us don't want to do that. So I wrote a novel that never really saw the light of day. And I did send it out to agents, including my dream agent. And, I thought maybe I'll be one of those people who they write one book and they're set. It sells and it's great. No, no agents wanted to sign me. But I did get quite a few responses back that said, we really like the book, but it's not for us. So I thought, okay, this book is not it. So I trunked that book. And then the part of the writing process that's always the most difficult for me is coming up with the idea. Once I have the idea, I'm fine generally, but I'm not one of those writers that has a list of 50 ideas. And when I finish one book, I just pick a new idea. It takes me a little while. So I don't even remember where the idea for the Ivy books came from, but eventually I got the idea. I wrote Ivy and I started the process all over again, trying to get an agent. And this time, I got a lot more personal responses quickly saying, again, that they liked the book, but worried that because it was dystopian and Hunger Games was very popular at the time, that I was too far behind the trend. And that's something people may not know about publishing. Like when Twilight was so popular, if you write a vampire book when Twilight is popular, you're too late, because publishing takes a long time. It can take a year or 2 years from the time your book is sold until it's published. And by then, people are on to something else. So they were worried that I was too far behind the curve. And honestly, when I wrote Ivy, I wasn't thinking of it as a dystopian novel. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It fits it in some ways, but not in others. So I thought, well, I feel like there's still something here, but agents were not working out. And so there's always self-publishing, which is, a lot of people do that and it works for them. I knew it would not work for me. I am not good at self-promotion. I'm not good at any of the things that are involved in selling books yourself. So that left smaller publishers. So I did quite a bit of research, and I found a smaller publisher that had a partnership with Macmillan, which is one of the big five. So the smaller publisher publishes the book, but then Macmillan gets it into bookstores. So I thought, well, that sounds intriguing. So I just sent them the book with a query letter. It went into a slush pile. And about a month later, an editor called me, and she had just randomly pulled it off the slush pile on a Friday night and taken it home and read it and called and made me an offer to publish both Ivy and the sequel, which I had not written yet. So I was thrilled. And Ivy, like Craig said, came out at the end of 2014. And I was supposed to have the sequel done, I think, mid 2015. And I was working on it. And then I had the idea for my first adult novel, The Roanoke Girls. And it was so clear and just in my head that I had to put the sequel aside and write Roanoke Girls. And my husband was panicking. He was like, but this book is due and you have to get it done. And I was like, I will get it done. So I didn't sleep much or eat much or do much of anything for several months. And I got Roanoke done, set it aside, finished the Ivy sequel. And then the smaller publisher that published Ivy only published young adult novels. And I never specifically set out to be a young adult novelist. It was just the Ivy idea lent itself to young adult. So I wasn't locked in. I didn't feel like, oh yes, I'm a young adult novelist and that's what I'm going to be forever. So I thought, well, this is an adult novel. I'll try to get an agent again. And so I did the whole querying process again. And this time I had 5 or 6 agents who wanted the book, which was amazing. But the funniest part was my dream agent from way back at that first book is now my agent. So it's funny how sometimes things work out just not necessarily on the timeline that you planned. So Roanoke came out in 2017, and then The Familiar Dark just about a year ago, right at the start of the pandemic. So all of the book events and everything like that were canceled, which was a bummer. But in the scheme of things going on, it's really, nothing to complain about. But my writing process, I'll talk about just briefly. It's how do I say this? I don't follow necessarily all of, you'll find online like lots of rules about writing, and you can go on various websites and they'll just have lists of rules. And I always say the only rule is whatever works for you is what works. So I don't outline. I never have. Well, I did once. Once I outlined a book and it killed the book for me. When I sat down to write, I felt like, well, I've already told this story. I'm bored. So I know the beginning, and I usually have sort of an idea of the end, but from the beginning to the end, I literally know nothing when I sit down to write. I do not know. And sometimes I will write myself into a corner that I cannot get out of, and I'll have to delete, but that's okay. To me, that's part of the process. And I generally know, now that I've done this enough times, that if I get to a point in the story and I'm just stuck, I just cannot, that I have made a wrong turn, usually with a character, that I've tried to force a character into something that doesn't fit them. So then I can backtrack and figure out, what would this character really do? So learning from things like that is important. And then, there are some rules that I think apply to everyone, that you need to read a lot. That just goes without saying. I met with someone for lunch several years ago, a friend of a friend of a friend who wanted to be a writer, and we were eating lunch, and I asked her what I ask everyone that I meet practically: have you read anything good lately? And she said, oh, I don't read. And I thought, oh boy, this is not going to end well. So you have to read. And I always tell people, read broadly, read things you think you might hate. Even if you do hate them, it helps you figure out your voice and what the sort of things you do like and that you don't like, and the sort of rhythms that speak to you as a writer and the things that don't. So I think obviously reading is really important. And then the other rule that I tend to stick with is always try to finish what you start. Because when you're starting a book, you're so excited. You've got this idea and all these new characters and whoa, you can't wait. And then you get to the middle and it's a slog sometimes. And you're like, why did I start this dumb book? This is the worst thing ever. I hate it. I hate this story. And it's so easy to just leave it and start something new. And then you end up with 5 half-finished books and never a book. And so I think it's important to get to the end. And even if you hate it, you're done and you can go back and you can try to fix it and you can try to rework it and things like that. So those are probably the 2 rules that I tend to stick with. The Familiar Dark, like Craig said, it's set in the Ozarks, and it opens with a murder, actually 2 murders of 2 12-year-old girls. And it follows the mother, Eve, of one of the girls as she sort of, I guess revenge might not be the right word, but she wants to figure out what happened, and she wants to I guess revenge does work. She wants to take revenge on whoever killed her daughter. And when I start writing, the very first thing I think about is setting. And some writers, it's character, some it is plot. For me, it's generally setting and then character and then plot. My books tend to be pretty character driven, but it's important to me to set my books in the Midwest, whether it's Kansas, like the Roanoke Girls, or the Ozarks, like the Familiar Dark. And it's partly because this is where I'm from. I've lived all over the country and all over the world, but I chose to settle here for a reason. And I love the Midwest. And I think it really lends itself to stories, and it's often underrepresented in crime fiction, especially. So it's important to me to set the stories in the Midwest, but I do have a little bit of a catch-22 with that, because I write really dark books about pretty unlikable people a lot of the time. And so I feel sort of torn, because I don't want to represent the Midwest as this awful place with all these people who are terrible. But I do think that it's important to set stories here. And those are just the types of stories I write. And I hope that readers are able to figure out that I am not saying that everyone who lives in the Ozarks is this way, or everyone who lives in rural Kansas is this way. It's more, I'm talking about these specific people in this specific place in this specific story. And I do try to, show different sides of all the characters, even the ones who most people would consider unlikable. Let me see. Oh, and with the Familiar Dark, a lot of people ask me where the idea came from. And I don't really know where my ideas come from exactly. But there was in Delphi, I believe, Indiana, I think that's where it was. A few years ago, there were 2 13-year-old girls who had a day off school, and they went on a hike along some railroad tracks, and their bodies were found the next day, and they'd been killed, and no one's ever been caught. No one's ever figured it out. And that's where the similarities end for the Familiar Dark. But that real life, those murders, I couldn't stop thinking about them when I heard about them. And so that sort of led to the writing of the opening scene of the Familiar Dark. And then from there, at that point, I didn't even know what the story was going to be about. I wasn't sure who the main character was going to be or where it was going to go. I just had that scene. And from there, the whole story sort of blossomed as I started writing. But it was that news story that actually triggered the Familiar Dark for me. One thing I will say, just in closing, is that trust the process of your writing. If anybody here is a writer, as you write more and more, you learn the things that work for you and that don't work for you. And it's really important to get a thick skin and to be able to take criticism well, because you're going to get it both from agents, editors, readers, and especially with editors. I know some people, when they get notes from an editor or a professor saying, they don't like this part of the writing or change this part, people tend to get kind of defensive about that. And if you can train yourself to sort of step back and really listen and look at what they're saying, and I'm not saying take every suggestion that someone makes and just change your whole story just because someone wants you to, but the ability to sort of step back from your own work and really think about, would this make the story better? Do they have a point here? Am I too close to it that I can't see what they're seeing? That's very helpful as a writer. And then if you are published and your book's out in the world, to be able to take a step back from it, then I always say that the book is mine while I'm writing it, but once it is published, it belongs to the reader, and whatever they think about it or feel about it or whatever opinions they have about it, that doesn't have anything to do with me. People are allowed to feel however they want to feel about the book, and I don't take it personally, or at least I try not to. I try to take a step back and know that I've released it into the world, sort of like a baby or something, and it's no longer mine to sort of hold on to so tightly. So I think that's just an important thing for anybody who might be thinking about writing to sort of learn. So anyway, that's all I've got right now.
Thank you very much. I mean, if you would like to read that passage from
Okay.
The Familiar Dark, that would be fine.
Sure.
Please do.
Okay. The paperback just came out, oh gosh, last week, I guess. So I just got my box of them, but this is the opening scene of the book, and it starts with the end. So the end. They died during a freak April snowstorm, blood pooling on a patchy bed of white. Afterward, some people said the killer must have kept an eye on the gathering gray clouds, taken the weather as a cue to strike, and picked the moment when everyone else was huddled indoors, shivering in their optimistic shirt sleeves and muttering about global warming. Armchair detectives trying to make sense of something that would never be anything but senseless. They were wrong, of course. It had nothing to do with the weather. The girls could have told them that if the girls had been capable of speaking. Izzy died first, dark brown hair tangled over her face and one eye peeking out between the strands. A slow blink, gaze trained on Junie's face. Another blink, focus fading. Junie waited for a third blink that never came, watched blood unspool in the space between them. She tried to reach for Izzy, meaning to shake her back into the world, but she couldn't make her own hand move. It felt weighted down, even though she couldn't remember being tied up, couldn't remember anything really, why she was here or what was happening, only a dim, distant terror that pulsed along with her fading heartbeat. She pushed a sound out of her ruined throat, a name, a plea, a prayer, but it never made it past her lips. A bubble of blood popped and spilled over. The snow pressed cold against her cheek. Shh, a voice said. It'll be over soon. Shh. A hand on her head stroking her hair. She tilted her eyes upward, the only part of her body she could seem to move. Saw the edge of the swing set, a branch coated in white, the flat iron gray sky. Last time she'd been here was with her mother. They'd had ice cream that melted down their hands faster than they could eat it. Hot, sweaty dusk and fireflies. Swinging side by side and Junie's mother jumping off her swing at its highest arc, blonde hair whipping out behind her, throaty laugh cutting through the air. Telling Junie the secret was not to think about it. Close your eyes and fly. Mama. The longing tore through her like a barbed hook, her body bucking once against the ground, her hand spasming into a fist. I want my mama. She smelled her mother's perfume. A spring garden doled out a single drop at a time to make the bottle last. She heard her mother's voice whispering comfort into the shell of her ear. She tasted salt, tears on her lips, and blood in her mouth. She knew this was the end and couldn't believe it was coming so close to the beginning. A sigh shuddered out of her. Watch me, Mama. I can do it. She closed her eyes and soared.
Well, that's a nice, cheerful beginning.
Yes.
That's really, I mean, just to start a book with the murder of two adolescent girls.
I know.
That's pretty tough.
It is. My husband read it when I was writing. He was like, "What are you thinking?" He was. Yeah. So I know, but like I said, I couldn't get the murder of those two girls out of my head, and so I wrote that, and then from there, the book sprung.
Yeah. That's an interesting seed for that novel. By the way, I would encourage our participants to go ahead and start coming up with some questions. We have some already, and while they're doing that, I want to ask if you will tell us a little bit about the book you've got coming out this summer, What's Done in Darkness.
Oh, that's Laura McHugh's book.
That's Laura McHugh's book.
And I have read it, by the way, because we're really good friends, and I blurbed it, and it is amazing. It's so good. So it comes.
I don't know why I got that confused. She is I think gonna be with us this fall.
Okay, great. Yeah, she's amazing
too. I know that y'all are friends. She's a pretty influential writer with a lot of other writers.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's always
So great. Anyway, and we're hoping to be able to get back to in-person gatherings at some point, and if that's the case, we hope we have you back as well.
Oh, yeah, that'd be lovely. Yes.
One question, you had mentioned about setting books in the Ozarks. Why do you think this is such a good area? I mean, is there a darkness about the place, or what is it?
I think so. I think it, especially for people who aren't familiar with the Ozarks, it feels like sort of a place that time sort of forgot, and not all of the Ozarks, but just parts of it feel very isolated and sort of cut off from the rest of the world. And so that sort of lends itself to suspense automatically. But I even like my editor, who is from New York, she's totally unfamiliar with this part of the country as a whole. So, small town Kansas or the Ozarks or small town Missouri, they just seem so foreign to a lot of readers, which it does, lend itself to that mystery aspect. But also I want people to know about these parts of the country, even if, like I said, my books don't necessarily represent them in the best light. I think it's important to not have, every book, and I know there's books set everywhere, but there's a lot of books set in the big cities and the coast. And I just think we sort of get forgotten here in the Midwest. But I think a lot of times small sort of insular communities where everyone knows everyone's business, but don't necessarily interfere with each other's business, also lends itself to these kinds of stories.
The Ozarks noir, someone was mentioning.
Yeah, I think now they're starting to call it rural noir. Like that's what Laura McHugh writes. That's what and so that's been a new thing in the last few years that they've started calling it.
Interesting.
They were calling it hick lit for a while, which I hated.
Oh gosh.
I hated. So rural noir is much better, I think.
Yes, that's preferable. At several points in this novel, in your latest novel, the suggestion or assertion is made that women are sunk in this world, whether they are soft or compliant or combative, hard. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I said, I don't outline. I also don't tend to sit down and think about themes so much when I start writing. I don't sit and think, well, this book is going to have like a feminist undertone or this, because I feel like when I've tried that in the past, then those themes become like too prominent and it's like hitting the reader over the head all the time. But as I'm writing and the characters are forming, those themes just sort of naturally emerge. And in this book, there was definitely sort of a theme about feminism or the effects of misogyny. And I do think that, like, I'm a big proponent of the Me Too movement and getting stories out there, but I do think sometimes that people forget that people who live in poverty or who are in these situations, it's a lot harder to get yourself out of it and to stand up for yourself than people think it is. You know, people think, oh, well, now that we are all aware of these things, they're just going to stop happening, or we can make them stop happening. But in certain parts of the world, that's just not a reality. And when you're rural poverty was another thing that I wanted to address in this novel, and how hard it is to get out of it once you're in it, generationally. And it's not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make different choices. Sometimes there are no other choices. And so, and within that, women tend to be at the bottom of the ladder, and that's just a reality. And so that was something I wanted to put in the novel for sure.
Yeah, there's vulnerability, but there's incredible strength.
Yes.
In the women in this novel. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and Eve's mom in particular is certainly a piece of work, but I I loved writing her. I loved her as a character, and I felt a lot of fondness for her, which people are always sort of horrified when I say that. But I think she genuinely felt like she was doing the best she could for her daughter. And was it the best? No. But given the circumstances and what she had to work with, she really felt like she was preparing Eve the best that she could for the life that she thought Eve would be living. So yeah, I definitely liked writing Lynette's character.
The fictional setting it's a wonderful name, Barren Springs. We could go for days on that, I suppose, but it's like described as the armpit of the Ozarks. It's a pocket of time.
Yeah.
What are the strengths, redeeming qualities of Barren Springs?
Well, I think, Eve talks about it a little bit, how people sort of band together to help each other through, hard times, and they can sort of rely on each other. And then the natural beauty of the Ozarks. I mean, the Ozarks are really beautiful, and a lot of people don't know that or don't realize that. And I think just, knowing that you have this group of people that you're all surviving a life that's not necessarily the easiest together, getting through it together is an important part of small communities.
Here's a question. There are two lines in the poem by the British poet Philip Larkin that read, "And only life can take so long to climb clear of its wrong beginnings and may never." In what ways do Eve and Cal fail to climb clear of their wrong beginnings? Should we understand this as some sort of failing on their parts as human beings?
No, I don't see it that way. In my earlier novel, The Roanoke Girls, it also dealt with family and things, and the main character was sort of able to claw her way out of that and move on. But in this book, I wanted a more hopeful ending, but it didn't seem genuine to me. It didn't seem to fit the characters. And I am in no way saying that however the circumstances you're born into, you are stuck there forever and you can never make your way out. But I do think that the way you're raised and the way you grow up has a huge influence on you. And sometimes it is not possible to escape it. And I don't know if it's a personal failing of theirs as much as it is they never had a shot, really. They were never exposed to much different that was different. Their mother sort of kept a stranglehold on them even after they pulled away from her. And so I think if, they had been taken away to a different place and raised by someone different, they might have turned out to be completely different people. But sometimes you can't escape your nature and the way you're nurtured. Like they had it from both directions.
Both ways, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. It's somewhat related. Popular culture sometimes facilitates, consciously or unconsciously, stereotypes in writing, especially in making the setting for a story evocative of a region or to set a certain tone. When you are writing, how do you go about creating an atmosphere or setting a tone? And is it easier or more difficult than creating and rounding out an individual character?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Like I said, I start with setting because in my books, the setting is almost a main character. Some books, it's not that way, and that's not bad or better. It's just the way it is. But for me, setting is so important for the overall tone of the book and the way the characters interact with their environment. So I do think a lot about setting, and I try to think about the way that places smell and the things that you see and the cadence of the way people talk and the things that are considered, more normal in this environment versus a different environment. And so I think I probably think about it and work on it just as much as I do fleshing out characters, because to me, they're all of a piece. They're all the same. And like, I know with the Roanoke Girls, it was set in a small town in Kansas, and it was based on the town where my mother grew up. And so I had been there a lot. And so I could literally, hear the sounds and, like I said, taste the food and things like that. And same with The Familiar Dark. I've spent a lot of time in the Ozarks. I've represented people from the Ozarks. And so, yeah, to me, it starts with the idea of the setting. And then as I'm writing, I try to get more and more granular, like, just down to the basics of the setting so that a reader who is in England or Spain can read it and feel the Ozarks, that they can know exactly where this is, even if they've never been here. So that's important to me.
Well, certainly. Thank you. That's very thought-provoking question and a very detailed answer. Thank you. Would you say there is a hero in this novel?
No.
That may be a stereotype in itself, just to say hero, and that may be too simplistic.
Yeah, no. I think there are people who are brave or strong or have like moments of grace that people, even Jimmy Ray has moments where he does things that are unexpected for someone like him. And that I definitely try to not have a purely evil or a purely heroic character, just because generally in life, I have rarely run across people like that. People tend to be a little bit of both in certain scenarios. So yeah, I don't think there's a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I admire Eve in a lot of ways, but I'm sad for her too. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked me, where do you think Eve is 5 years from the end? I'm like, no, we're good. Like, come on, let's be honest. And that sort of broke my heart because I didn't know exactly, like I said, where the novel was going to go. And I wanted to give her something better, but it just didn't fit. It didn't fit her. It didn't fit her story. So
if you're looking for happily ever after,
this isn't the book.
Yeah, this isn't the place. Well, can you say something? I don't want to be redundant here, but can you say something about darkness I guess thematically, as both a danger, but also as an alluring element, both literal darkness as in night and that sort of thing, and then metaphoric darkness, such as that portrayed by Eve's mother.
Yeah, I think that in this book, Eve is, a lot of the book does take place in literal nighttime. And she grows more and more comfortable in the night, which is obviously symbolic. But I do think that for Eve, the metaphorical darkness is sort of like a security blanket. It is something familiar. It is something that she knows from growing up and watching her mom survive. And so when the worst thing possible happens to her, as so many of us do, you retreat home. You retreat to the thing that is familiar and comforting, even though in many ways it's a terrifying place and a terrifying way to live. When she doesn't have anything else, that's the comfort that she seeks. And I've seen that, with actual people that I've known, that sometimes when everything falls apart, you retreat back, even if you know it's not good for you, even if you know that the darkness is going to take over. And so, yeah, I think Eve's smart enough to know it's not wise, but she's not able to make a different choice either.
Yeah.
So.
Being in very difficult circumstances.
And I think she knows what she's going to do. And so she needs that part of herself in order to do it. And so, like I said, that's where she retreats. It's what's familiar.
And that type of conflict is what creates good fiction.
Yeah. The conflict between what you know or what you know you should do and what your instincts are telling you. Yeah, that's always, and it's
kind of internal conflict.
Right, exactly.
Some people suggest that problems in families and communities often are at root intergenerational in nature. Do you think this novel helps support that theory?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, with like even generational poverty, it's hard to escape because it comes down the line and you're automatically at a disadvantage from a family that passes wealth down the line. And the same is true with conflict. You've got Eve and her brother in this totally dysfunctional relationship with her mother, who had a totally dysfunctional relationship with her parents, who had a totally dysfunctional relationship with their parents, and you never see anything else modeled. That is normal, that, for Eve and Cal. And the fact that Eve was able to break out of that even enough to raise her daughter differently, that's probably the closest to heroic in the book to me, is that Eve was able to make different choices with her own daughter than her mother had made with her. And so that she was a good mother for that period of time. But yeah, I think that the intergenerational, what am I trying to say? The relationships are vitally important in this book for sure.
Okay, I think I'm not getting any more questions in right now. Since I was committed the terrible faux pas of attributing a novel to you that's not yours, would you like to tell us about upcoming work of yours? What?
No worry, I'm glad. I was going to say something about Laura's book actually, so that was perfect. I'm working on one right now. It's just the beginning stages. So I tend to have a process where I finish a book, like I finish writing The Familiar Dark, and I right away jump into a new book. And sometimes I write all of it, sometimes I write half of it, and then I realize this is terrible. And it's because I'm still in the old characters. And so the characters in the new book tend to be kind of flat, or I'm writing Eve all over again. So that book just gets tossed to the side. So I've already done that part. So now I'm on one that I'm hoping will turn into something. It's set in small town Kansas. So I keep flipping and flopping between Kansas and Missouri. but yeah, it's, I'm working on it now, and I'm hoping that it'll be out eventually. So yeah, I tend to write fairly fast once I get going and really get into the book, but we'll see. The COVID has definitely slowed me down, I think.
I was going to ask that. What is the impact of the pandemic on your writing?
You know, you would think because we're stuck at home and
Mhm.
that's where writers write, and that I would just be churning stuff out. But my kids are older, so they don't, they're older teenagers, so they don't really need me that much. But they just having people in the house all the time is different. I'm used to, all day just quiet. And so that's been different. But I also think with COVID, my attention span just hasn't been what it was before. I'll write for a little bit and then I'll check the news and then I'll write a little bit and I'll do something else. I'm having a hard time focusing the way that I did before. And I've talked to quite a few people who sort of struggled with that. So I'm hoping that eventually that'll go away, but it's a little frustrating right now for sure.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
You said you flip-flop between Kansas and Missouri with your settings, but you really like Missouri best, don't you?
I live in Missouri. I'm a Missouri girl now. Yeah, I grew up in Missouri, so born in Kansas, but yeah, I've spent many more years in Missouri. Although I am Jayhawk, my husband went to Mizzou, so we have like a divided house in that, but yeah. But yeah.
Someone wrote, do you know Nancy Allen?
Yeah.
She's actually on the faculty here, and a crime fiction writer.
Okay, I've heard that name, but I don't know her personally.
Yeah. So there are some similarities, I think,
Okay.
with the work there. Okay. If there are no more questions, this has been lovely. Anything else that you would like to add? I think we're 5 minutes away, so we've got pretty close to an hour.
Thank you so much for having me.
It has been a pleasure. And good luck with your upcoming book. And once again, maybe we'll be able to have you on the campus at some point.
That would be nice.
A real live audience that you can interact with and so forth. And you can sign their books. Imagine that.
I know. It would be lovely. So.
Well, thank you. Thanks to everyone. Once again, remember this has been recorded and it will be going up on YouTube. So if you have friends who weren't able to join us, let them know that it will be on our YouTube channel pretty soon. And, encourage them to come see it. I've enjoyed this very much. I hope it's been enjoyable for you, Amy, and all of our attendees.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.